Pamela Poitras-Heinrichs has spent the last few years trying to retrace a fractured history. Through the Hong Kong Veterans Commemorative Association's Indigenous Veterans Project, she and a team of volunteers have identified over 100 Indigenous soldiers who served in the Battle of Hong Kong.
Rather than just the association saying, here's our Indigenous soldiers, I wanted to see how the Indigenous families would benefit from it.
Many of those veterans, like her father, Ferdinand Poitras, a Red River Métis from Winnipeg, hid their identities. In fact, at the time, there was no Métis category. Soldiers were identified as First Nation or by European ethnicities.
The project is special to me in that regard too, because I'm sure there's other families that were the same, that we can now take pride in that.
Ferdinand Poitras enlisted with the Winnipeg Grenadiers in 1939 when he was 19 years old. They were sent to Hong Kong in November 1941.
Britain asked Canada to send regiments just in case Japan attacked the British colony of Hong Kong. And it was apparently never dreamt that that would happen.
But it did happen.
Their army vehicles didn't reach them, all kinds of supplies didn't reach them, and they were greatly outnumbered by the Japanese, who were battle-hardened troops. They had to surrender Christmas Day 1941, and any that didn't survive the battle became prisoners of war.
For the next 3.5 years, Poitras was a prisoner of war in a Japanese-run camp.
My dad was prisoner number 110, and he could still say that number in Japanese right up until his 80s.
264 Canadian POWs died in those camps. In August 1945, the Canadians were liberated after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to surrender. However, when Poitras and other Métis veterans returned to Canadian soil, they faced another reality. A Veterans Affairs letter dated March 5th, 1946, describes his prospects.
This was the part I found interesting. His background and education place him in the general laborer class. So they wasn't even thought that they could go on and do anything more.
Poitras died in 2008 at the age of 87. Growing up in Winnipeg, Poitras-Heinrichs said her father never spoke of being Métis. She began reconnecting at 19 years old, which is the same age her father was when he enlisted. While some Métis veterans hid their identities, others, like Manitoba Métis Federation Minister John Fleury, wore them with pride. But that pride wasn't always accepted.
They either asked you to identify as English or French, and I had a issue with that, so I would cross it out and I'd say I was Métis, and they would say that's unacceptable, you have to respond with the English or French.
Fleury also understands why some Métis hid their indigeneity.
If people could assimilate into the non-Indigenous society, then they would, for the sake of advancement, protection of their families.
In October, Poitras-Heinrichs ran a booth on the Indigenous Hong Kong Veterans Project at this year's Manitoba Métis Federation's annual General Assembly.
We had people walk by and say, that's my great-grandfather. And there were some other families that came by that had no idea about the association or about our project and what we were doing, and they were literally in tears at our booth. So moved and grateful for what we're doing for their family member.
Today, Poitras-Heinrichs and her children are reclaiming the Métis pride that their father and grandfather wasn't afforded, and with every Indigenous veteran identified, helping other families do the same. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.